Hello students, welcome to Angel Health Academy. Topic for the day or topic for the session is Analytical Study in Epidemiology. Analytical study is the second major type of epidemiological study. So, first study is the descriptive study. I have been uploaded a video in detail about descriptive study. You can go through that. Analytical study is the second major type of study or the continuation of the descriptive study in epidemiological study or methods or approach. Thus, it goes further than the descriptive study, or it is more than the descriptive study, because in descriptive study we only describe the occurrence of any health problem or disease in the community. But in analytical study we go further or beyond the descriptive study by analyzing the relationship between the risk factors, that is exposure, and the health problems, that is any disease or the outcome, health problem among the people in the community. Okay, thus analytical study goes further than the descriptive study by analyzing the relationship between the etiological factor and the particular problem or determinants of the disease and the disease or the outcome. Unlike descriptive studies which focus on what the distribution of any disease or any health problem in relation to person, place and time, analytical study focus on why the disease occur in the community, okay, among the people in the community, and how it occurs among the particular people in the community. Next is aims or goals of analytical study. Analytical studies in epidemiology aim to investigate, to study the determinants, the factors of the health outcomes or any disease occurrence or outbreak in the community. So it aims to investigate, understand, okay, or identify the determinants or factors or predisposing factors for any particular disease or the health problem in the community by identifying and quantifying the association between the or relationship between the exposure and the outcome or exposure and the disease. Then testing hypothesis. Usually in descriptive study, at the end we prepare the hypothesis that will be tested, that will be proved, okay, in analytical study. Then third one is establishing the potential, okay, the possible causal relationship between the exposure or predisposing factor or risk factors or any interventions and to the outcome, that is the disease or the health condition, health event or health problems, okay. So the goals of analytical study includes identifying and quantifying the association between the causal factors or etiological factors and the particular outcome, and testing the hypothesis which is formulated at the first step of the analytical study, and establishing the potential causal relationship, okay, etiological relationship between the exposure and the particular problem or disease in the community. Next is use of analytical study. First use is it is used to test the hypothesis. Okay, either we form at the end of the descriptive study or at the beginning of the analytical study we prepare or formulate the hypothesis. That hypothesis will be tested during data analysis. Okay, by using the inferential statistics. Then second is to determine the statistical association present between the exposure and the outcome or predisposing factors or etiological factors and the particular disease. Okay, so if there is any statistical association between the etiological factor and or exposure and outcome, to understand what is the strength of the association. Okay, strength of association also will be found in analytical study. So analytical study is also used to understand, to determine the strength of the association between the exposures and the outcome or disease and others. Okay, so these are the some of the important uses of analytical study in epidemiology. Then key concepts in analytical study. What are the important components or concept of analytical study? So there are 6 important concepts in analytical study. First one is exposure. Second one is outcome. Then relative risk, RR, odds ratio, OR, confounding factors and the bias, okay, or errors. So first concept is exposure. Exposure are nothing but it is a factor that may be a behavior of the individual, okay, unhealthy practices or any condition, health condition or any interventions, okay, the treatment aspects whose effect on health or disease is being studied. Okay, in analytical study we study about the factors. That factors is known as the exposure. Then second concept is outcome. Outcome will be the result of the exposure. So the health result of the exposure, okay, that is called the outcome. Okay, so that is the result of the exposure. We call it as health result. That is the disease, that is health problem, okay, being investigated, being identified in analytical studies. Example, any disease, any outbreak, okay, recovery among the cases in the community, and even mortality rate or death, okay, due to some diseases. This all will be the outcome concept in analytical study. Then about the relative risk, RR. Relative risk is nothing but it is a measure used in, especially in cohort studies, to compare the risk of the outcome, okay, in exposed people when compared to the unexposed people or unexposed group. So it is a measure used in cohort studies to compare the how much risk for the people who are exposed to particular exposure or factors, okay, when comparing to unexposed people in the community to have the same diseases. For example, if the incidence rate of lung cancer among the exposed people in a community or given community is 30 and the rate among non-exposed is only 2, okay, so the relative risk is seen by 30 divided by 2, okay, that is incidence rate among exposed, that is 30 divided by incidence rate among unexposed, we'll get the 15. So the relative risk among exposed people for lung cancer in the community is 15 times higher than the non-exposed people to have a lung cancer. This is about the relative risk, how to find out the relative risk in cohort studies. Okay. Then next is odds ratio, OR, odds ratio. So odds is the ratio of probability, the possibility, okay, the potentiality. So the ratio of the probability that an event will happen to the probability or potentiality that it will not happen. So all those who are exposed to particular exposure or predisposing factor may have the disease or may not have the disease. That possibility is called or studied in odds ratio. Okay. So it is a ratio of the probability that an event, a disease will happen to the probability at the same time that will not happen. Okay. That means all are exposed to particular predisposing factor may not have the particular disease. That probability will be identified through odds ratio. Usually it is used in the case control studies of the analytical studies. So used in case control studies to estimate the odds of exposure in the cases when compared to the control. So we have another type of the study in analytical study, that is case control studies. We have two groups. It is a comparison study between the cases and control. Case is the people with the disease and control is the people without any disease. So we estimate, we identify the or determine the odds of exposure. What is the possibility or probability of having the disease among the cases with the exposure when compared to the control people. Okay, that is about the odds ratio. Then fifth concept is confounding variables. So it is an external factor or variable that is related to both the exposure and outcome of a particular problem or disease. Potentially it may distort the relationship between the exposure and the outcome. So it is a factor or external factors or variable who influence the result or relationship between the exposure and the outcome of a disease. Okay. So when an external factor is related to both the exposure and outcome, potentially which may distort, which may negatively affect the result of the disease is called confounding factors. So that could be seen in the analytical study, and we control the confounding factors with various methods like matching and statistical application, etc. Okay. The last one is bias. Okay, last component is bias. It is nothing but error. So systematic errors that can be lead to incorrect conclusion or result of the epidemiological study or analytical study is called bias. Okay, that may include a selection bias and recall bias. Selection bias occurs in when selecting the study samples. If you are not selected a proper or not using the proper method in selection of the study participants, that may lead to selection bias. And recall bias when we take the data collection. If you are not taking the proper data collection method or proper data collection among the samples or a study population, that may lead to bias or errors, that is called recall bias. So these are the 6 important component or concept of the analytical study. Next is classification of analytical study. Analytical study can be classified as observational analytical study, that is non-experimental study, and experimental study such as experimental analytical studies. I have been already uploaded a video about the classification of epidemiological studies. You can go through that. I have explained everything in detail. Okay, you can understand that. Under observational analytical studies, we have population based study and individual based study. Population based study example is ecological study. Individual based study in analytical study include cohort study, case control study, and cross sectional study. Then experimental analytical study includes two studies. Okay, that is randomized control trials. That is analytical randomized controlled trials, RCT, or clinical trials, and non-randomized controlled trial, that is a field trial or community trials in experimental analytical studies. Okay, for better understanding you can go through my video, that is classification of the epidemiological studies. Okay, so next is steps in analytical studies. I have been already uploaded a video in detail about the steps in analytical studies. We have 11 steps when comparing to descriptive study we have 10 steps. I have made some mnemonic for that. It may be the same as steps in descriptive study. So you can go through that and you can understand in detail about the steps in analytical study, as it is one of the important video or important topic in community health nursing under epidemiology. So the 11 important steps in analytical studies include define the research problem or question or the objectives, or formulation or define the hypothesis for the study. Second is selecting the study design or design selection. Third one is defining the study population. Okay, according to the type of the study of analytical study, we have to select the study samples. Then fourth step is define the study variables. Okay, independent and dependent variables such as exposure and outcome. Then data correction. Then decreasing or minimizing the bias, error, and confounding variables which distort the relationship between the exposure and outcome in analytical study. Then data analysis. Then interpretation of the result of the study. Then reporting, that is research report and disseminations. Okay, generalization of the study result to the public. Then making various recommendations to implement the preventive services based on the study or evidence-based practice, and conducting future studies. Okay, elaborate studies with the same topic. Okay, with the different study methods or study types. And last one is ethical consideration, that is maintaining the confidentiality of the data collected from the samples and taking informed written consent from the study samples to maintain the ethical considerations. So these are the 11 important steps in analytical study. I have been explained in detail with the mnemonics in my video about the steps in analytical study. You can go through that. Next is the advantages of the analytical study. First advantage is it helps to identify the cause, okay, causality, etiological factors and risk factors about the particular disease or health problem among the people in the community. So it helps to identify the etiological factors or causality and risk factors or determinants for the various health related problems and diseases in the community. Second one is it helps to test the hypothesis which we have prepared at the first step of the analytical study. So to test the hypothesis. Then another advantage of the analytical study, each of the studies in analytical study is the comparative in nature. We have two groups, we make the comparisons and we'll get the effective result of the particular study. And fourth one is analytical study is relatively quick and cost effective when comparing to other studies. It is a fast study and cost effective. Okay, we have less expensive when comparing to some of the experimental studies. And others can include, we have flexibility in the study types or designs. So we have many types of the design. So we can use any design according to the need and according to the situation and practicability. Okay, that is about the flexibility in selecting designs. Moreover, we can measure the incidence and prevalence of the particular problem among the people in the community by using analytical study, especially cohort study, etc. Then disadvantages of the analytical study in epidemiological methods or approach. First one is it is time consuming and sometimes it is expensive. Forward looking cohort study, that will be the prolonged study. Okay, that will be time consuming, and if you do the analytical randomized controlled trial, it is an expensive studies. Okay, so time consuming and expensive when comparing to the descriptive study. Then potential for confounding variables and bias. So there is a possibility for having the errors in the study because of the influence of the confounding variables and extraneous variables and the bias like selection bias, information bias, etc. And another limitation or disadvantage is it is not always ethical or feasible to conduct the study under analytical epidemiological methods. So not always ethical or feasible to conduct the study. For example, randomized controlled trial or cohort studies. Okay. Then fourth limitation is it requires a careful design and analysis. So there are many designs are there, but we have to carefully select the design. Otherwise, it will negatively affect the result of the study. Okay. In analysis also, we have to carefully analyze the data collected from the samples of analytical studies, and others such as sometimes it is limited to find out the association between etiological factors and the outcome or disease. Then there is a chance of loss of follow-up in case of the cohort studies. It is a prolonged studies, so we cannot continue or we cannot get the same sample during the follow-up study or the longitudinal or the prolonged studies under cohort study. So these are the some of the important disadvantages, demerits or limitation of the analytical studies in epidemiology. So far we have discussed about the analytical study in epidemiological methods or approach. Hope this video really benefits in your studies and exams. If you feel it is really worth and beneficial, please like, share and subscribe my channel, and stay tuned with the Angel Health Academy for the next and important academic video. Thank you.